Welcome to the Eyes Up Mindset podcast, where we explore what it means to grow daily and find our best in every aspect of life.
Welcome back to another episode of the Eyes Up Mindset podcast. I'm John Shirkey here with my friend and co-host, Jamie Wagner. Jamie, it's good to see you again. We just were talking, it's been only a couple of days, but it feels like it's been weeks since we got to touch base and connect.
Yeah, that's kind of crazy because just having a business together, if you go way back to our, episode 5, I believe Jared Hall said, when you run a business together, it's kind of like being in a marriage. And that's kind of what our relationship has turned into a little bit. We talk more or less every day, and we haven't talked on the phone in like 5 days. So kind of odd, but yeah, it's great to connect.
But that's how it goes in marriages even too, sometimes, where it's like, yes, you're connecting, you're communicating, but there's no real, like, you just kind of get into this flow of what's happening in life. And it just, all of a sudden you got 3 or 4 days have gone by and it's like, where did those go and what did we do?
Yeah, that's exactly what has happened in my life, and I'm assuming yours as well. And that's kind of the topic today in some ways is this, no guests today. We're going to touch base between the two of us on some topics that we think are relevant for you guys. But that's the piece of it, is this idea of what happens when life happens and kind of like that slow fade begins, right? Because we talked with Jake Thompson about slow fade and this idea about life is a series of slow fades. And in the context we were talking with him was about friendships, and you just kind of fade in and out of these friendships because they're unintentional, they're not on purpose, these sort of things. And life follows the same series of actions. And so I kind of just said to you, just hit record, I have an idea. And so for those of you that don't know, John is kind of my therapist sometimes, because this is what he is trained to do. But one of the things that I've been realizing is, now we're back to school and I'm teaching again part-time, and like that's really busy. We've been traveling a lot because there's some big life potential changes happening in our world, my wife and I's. And so we've been super busy with that context. Sports are starting again, both nationally, and that for some reason gets way too much of my attention. Not for some reason. It's very interesting and engaging, but US Open and the NFL is back and NBA playoffs are happening. And then in Minnesota, they just passed that high school sports are happening again. Football and volleyball. And so now we have more responsibility as a business to go and serve some of these programs that we've worked with in the past and that are interested in working with us in the future. And you happen to be in Montana. And so like that falls on me being in person with some of these things. And so it's just kind of like everything has come at us in a way that's like, wow, I need to take a breath for a second. But then there's all these other things I want to continue to do, or I want to keep doing, that I've had really good success with, or that I've been really diligent and disciplined about. And yet this overlap has kind of washed those things away. And so from my perspective, I wanted to have a conversation with you about what happens when life kind of hits you in the face and you have to start over. You have to, like, you've been making progress, you've been doing all this good work, and you feel like you had some momentum going, and then a week comes by and you haven't touched any of that stuff, or your goals seem really far away again. What happens then? And I know that this is real for all of us, because life just shows up and it says, you got to pay attention to X right now. Also, we have a 10-month-old who is mobile. Like, she is everywhere right now. And so you turn your back for a second and she's like, where's our daughter right now? What room is she in the house? And it's just like, your brain is fried. And so I thought I would ask you for some advice today, John, or that we could maybe get to some advice today between the two of us and having a real conversation about this place of life.
Well, and I think it's probably true of a lot of you out there listening too, because we just had school start. Restrictions on work and leisure are loosening, like it or not. They're loosening. So people are out and about doing more things. We have more requirements on our time and our energies. And like you said, we are just coming out of this period where basically we're all on lockdown, and you either had the opportunity to make some changes and get intentional about whether your physical health, your mental health, your relationships, whatever it was. And now again, life hits you in the face and it's like, oh, hey, we have all these responsibilities again, and they're starting now. Well, and you also said it, like, it happens to everybody. So what do we do about it? I think the first thing, and it goes back to what we've been talking about for, it seems like forever, and maybe this is just the point, is awareness that it is happening. Because the slow fade that you talked about, it only is a problem when you allow it to be day after day after day. A slow fade from today to, next week is, in the grand scheme of things, not that big of a deal. But when you start to make choices every day that take you further away from some of that progress and some of those things that you prioritized not that long ago, every day you make that decision, first of all, gets a little bit easier to make that decision tomorrow.
Well, that's the thing, right?
And
that's
eventually,
the hard part is like, I get stuck on this, like, oh, I didn't do it yesterday. I didn't do it the day before. So now my streak is broken, or this thing that I was working toward, And so, yes, you say this, and I'm like, I know that that's true in my person, right? Like, I know that that's true. I got to pay attention to it, fix it, realize that it's happening, not let, like James Clear, I think, said habits are the compound interest of life, and it's like, what's the most important factor in compound interest? Time. And so when you like have bad habits, the longer those things continue, the harder it is to fix that problem. Like it compounds negatively. And like in the converse, it compounds positively. And I certainly felt that over the last 6 months, like things were compounding positively. And now it feels like a week has gone by and I've struggled to be engaged in playing guitar or writing or reading, these things that I really value. And like, how do I start again? And that's, I didn't mean to derail your train of thought, but like, that is the challenge, is like, how do I get back going?
Well, right. And the challenge is also not to then compare yourself to where you were and expect that that is where you are again now. It's resetting expectations. We talked to Tom a couple of weeks ago, and off air, he challenged us to start thinking about this. And we need to find somebody that is an expert in the expectations and resetting. I think that would be an incredibly valuable conversation, but that's what we're talking about, right? Where we have an expectation of, this is how I was performing. I had this streak of days playing the guitar, days eating healthy, days, exercising, reading, fill in the blank, whatever it is for you. And now I have a couple of days where I don't do it. And it's like, oh, well, now I feel bad about myself because I'm not at the same spot I was 3 days ago. Well, it's about resetting that expectation and saying, okay, I have to start from here. The reality is, whenever you started that streak, it was the same. There was a day where you chose to slow fade in a positive direction. It didn't happen all at once, right? And that's the cool thing about it, is it works both directions. More times you make that choice for the things that you prioritize, the easier it is tomorrow to do it. But there's a thing that you and I have talked about, and I think is a struggle for people sometimes, is giving yourself some grace, not beating yourself up about having a bad day, having a bad week, whatever it is, and saying, you know what, I'm going to screw this up. It's going to be up and down. And that's okay. I'm not perfect, but how do I move forward, right?
Well, and I think what's really interesting about this, as I reflect a little bit you say some of this stuff, give yourself some grace. And we've certainly had that conversation. But so much of our life has been like dictated by timetables and deadlines. And a lot of the stuff that we're talking about has no deadline, right? It's something we want to get better at for life. Like, and so many of us are willing to sign up for an activity for 2 weeks or for a month or for 6 months. And you're willing to invest if you know the end date, if you know the end goal. Well, what about like when the end goal is your end date, right? When it's, I want to be better at this thing for the remainder of my life. Well, you have to have grace because you're not perfect and you're not going to do it every single day. You're not, like, if you told me, all right, Jamie, your challenge here is to play the guitar every day for 3 weeks. Done. Like, what do I get at the end? I don't even need anything, right? Just somebody challenged me to do it. It's time to do it, right? If you said 6 months, it's going to be harder, but I just did that. I think I missed 2 days in 6 months, you know? And that was with a bunch of things. I had a ton of stuff that I had chosen to engage with, that I was going to work on. And I got a lot better at it. But it wasn't, not just writing, not just guitar, not just reading. There's a bunch of other stuff there too. But now, like, thinking about that being an obligation for the rest of my life, because like, when's the end date? When does this end? Is it a year? Like, would I feel satisfied if I did it every day for a year? Well, I don't know, because a year later, if I didn't touch it again, I probably, like, let's use guitar, just stay in that example. Like, if I didn't play the guitar for a whole year, I'm not going to be very good at it if I don't, like, all the progress I made for a year might not be there. Some of it would be, obviously, but so, like, it's an ongoing, continuous battle. And that is really stressful mentally, sometimes it's like, yeah, that's awesome. I want to stay in this fight for as long as I can because I know that's the best version of me. But sometimes, like, man, this is a grind.
But it's also about setting up a process by which you can evaluate that, right? You don't have to play guitar for the rest of your life. And I think that's an excuse that we use that's a really handy excuse. Well, I don't know how long I can do this for. Okay. So give yourself a shorter time frame. Give yourself 2 weeks if that's what works for you. And you're like, 2 weeks is something that I can commit to. I'm going to read for the next 2 weeks. I'm going to go for a walk every day for the next 2 weeks. Cool. And then at 2 weeks, put a reminder on your phone or in your email or wherever on your mirror that says reevaluate on this date. And then you say, okay, is that the thing that I want to continue? Have I consistently made that a priority in my life? And do I want to continue? Because we all go through stages of life, right? And seasons of life where I'm a golfer. I grew up golfing. I played a ton of golf when I was in high school and just out of college. And then I kept playing golf, but not a ton. And then I went through a period of maybe 4 or 5 years in my life where I played like 3 or 4 times a year, which for me was almost nothing. And now this summer I got to play a bunch because of the stage of life, the season of life I'm in. And I also was able to make it a priority. But it's just going to come and go, just like you with your daughter crawling around, being more of, a magnet for your time and your energy, is that you have to prioritize those things and say, this is what I can do now. And if it's longer than 2 weeks, great. But it's about that reevaluation process and not saying I have to do this forever. There can be a shorter end date, and then you start over or you start something else.
And so I know that some books have made regular appearances on this show, on our podcast, but like, I seriously, if you haven't read Atomic Habits by James Clear, like, read it. It's fantastic. And he talks about make it easy, right? If you want to change a behavior, like make it easy to achieve. And that's what you're talking about. Because when you say, I want to do this for the rest of my life, it seems super, super daunting. When you say, I need to do this for 2 weeks, cool. Like I can do that. And this is like the New Year's resolution thing. Somebody's like, oh, I'm going to do it all year. You know, I'm going to do this for the whole year. Well, how long does it last? A couple of weeks. And why does it only last a couple of weeks? Is because you don't check back in. You don't reevaluate after a certain time. You're like, okay, I'm doing this a little bit, you know, am I meeting a goal? Am I meeting an expectation? What I think has been really fascinating about this, and I didn't think about this until we started this conversation, is a couple weeks ago, I dropped my computer and the screen broke. And because Apple is crazy busy right now, and you have to like schedule, not only if you want to get something fixed, you have to schedule a shopping appointment. If you just want to go there to shop, you have to schedule. So you can't get into the store and you can't get your, like, so I haven't been able to get my screen fixed. Well, that's the computer. And this is my own problem because I could just put it in a Google Doc, right? But I have it in an Excel spreadsheet, all of my tracking, all the things that I pay attention to and write down every day. If I had to write a 0 every day in how many pages I read or how much time I spent playing guitar, I would do it, right? But right now, because my screen is broken, I have is this convenient excuse to say, oh, I don't ever see it. I don't ever notice it. I don't ever pay attention to it. And then the day kind of fades away and I'm like, oh, I didn't do this today. I didn't do this thing today that I really value and prioritize because it just kind of slips away. And when I have that document open every time I look at my computer, you know, because it's almost always open, it reminds me, you know, so his rules are make it easy and make it obvious. Well, when I'm not seeing it consistently, it's really easy for it to fall apart. And so this is kind of how our therapy sessions work, podcast listener. John says some things and then I have a realization and then I talk a lot. But like, but that's a huge part of it for me, I think, is that when I write it down, when I make it obvious to myself, it's much easier to do also.
But it's also, it is about that expectation piece and the excuses we allow ourselves to make. A couple weeks ago, I had a post in our Facebook group and it's like, what's the most common excuse that you use to not make progress? Because excuses kill progress. And we all have similar ones, right? I don't have enough energy. I didn't sleep well last night. I don't have time because I have all these other things. And it just made me think because, you know, similarly for me, I have some family stuff going on that we're trying to deal with. You know, my wife and I are also kind of in the middle of life transitions. Are we going to stay living where we are currently? Are we going to move because of work stuff? So there's all these things that are convenient excuses. But when you start to actually look at them, like, do I not actually have time to play guitar for 10 minutes?
Yeah.
Well, no, it's so, I mean, and I'm going to say it because it's you, but like, it is so soft. And I say that to me too. Right. But again, it comes back to intentional living. What are you going to prioritize? And yes, you need to take care of your daughter and you need to spend time with your wife and doing that. But at the same time, you have the 10 minutes, the 20 minutes. Everyone does. If your excuse is time, that's garbage because you spend time on social media. You spend time, you know, at the water cooler at work. You spend time, you know, reading the, you know, something. Absolutely. And we've talked about that before. Yeah. But you have to be aware of it. And if you're not, then you can make that excuse and it's fine. But the other side of it too, another helpful thing, you said, what else can we do? We had one of our good friends reach out to us the other day and he's like, hey, my sleep pattern is off because I get home from work and I do all these things and then I just end up getting into a TV show or a documentary or a book or whatever it is. And all of a sudden it's midnight or 1 o'clock and I have to be up again early in the morning and it just repeats. And then what happens is I have this internal voice that says, oh, you're not even strong enough to make the decision to go to bed. Well, okay, but you got to give yourself some grace. Two, you're prioritizing something for some reason. It's just becoming aware of it, and then
Well, and that was my response to that text message was, what's the why, right? What's the why? And so much of this conversation echoes so many of the podcasts that we've had, because the advice that we've been given here by our guests, the challenges that have been laid out by them are so everyday applicable, right? And Seth Olson, former NFL player, like, what's your why, right? What's your why behind that? That's not just like, why do you want to play football and get better at that thing? Why do you want to be a great leader in your business? Why do you want to be a great parent? Like, some of those questions are easy and obvious, but why do you want to go to bed earlier? Like, why do you want to stay up later? What's the thing there that you're trying to get by doing that? And when you can start to ask that question, and that's self-awareness also, and then you say, hey, that's softness to have, those excuses are softness. I just hear Coach Jay again, like, okay, let's go. Like, next, let's go, and to me, that's the challenge that I need to hear right now. It's like, all right, the last 2 weeks were tough. Last week and a half was tough. Okay, let's punch that sucker in the face and let's go, and it's just, so many of us, I think you're right. I think at just right now, middle of September 2020, we're being faced with a new series of challenges again. And a lot of us are probably facing a similar thing where it's like, man, I felt like I was making progress. I felt like I was going in the right direction. And now all this stuff is sitting on my plate. What do I do?
yeah, and you got to pick it. You might not have time for all of those things that you were doing.
Yeah.
But you do have time for the most important things. And remembering that it doesn't have to be this ridiculous amount of time and energy that you're devoting to it. If it's working out and you were working out for an hour a day, and all of a sudden maybe you don't have an hour, but do you have 10 minutes every morning to go for a walk? Yeah, probably. Instead of hitting the snooze one more time or having this extra, take your second cup of coffee on your walk instead of sitting, having your second one, and then, shoot, I only got a few minutes before I get to work, or I have to do this thing, right? So it's identifying those things, what is the most important. If you don't have time for all of those things, identify what's the most important, and then set a realistic expectation. Reset a realistic expectation.
Yeah. You said something really important. Like, for me, I chose like 6 or 7 things I was going to try and do every single day. That's serious. I mean, I'm serious. This.
Yep.
But all of those aren't super important. They're things I want to do, but they're not things that I need to do. They're things that might help my mental health or might help me think. But you know what else helps my mental health? Making supper for my family, like, and having my wife feel like I'm there and involved, And so there are choices that need to be made. There are choices, but you can still prioritize these things. Like you said, there is some time. You might not have all of the time. And that's a tremendous challenge for me, because I want to do it all. And I want to compare myself to the person I was 3 weeks ago because I had all this other time, or a month and a half ago, because we're locked in the house, and you can't go out and do all these different things. And I wasn't working, because school hadn't started yet, and we weren't serving any teams because it's the middle of summer. It's a dead period. Like, oh, I have all of this time. Well, no longer is that true. What do I really want to do? I don't know that I know the answer, to be completely honest. I don't know what of those things are the most important for me. But that's a really important question, obviously, because otherwise I
Well,
just won't do anything.
and one way to figure that out, though, another potential tool for people out there, if you've never done an energy audit, you were talking about, you had this conversation with your wife. We were having this conversation before we hit record, was what are some things that are on your plate that are draining to your energy? And so maybe you want to just explain that tool that we've used with people before, where it's like identifying the things that drain us, identifying the things that fill us up, and then how do we look to balance that, whether it's our personal or our work lives. I mean, it's applicable to all of those things.
Yeah, this I don't exactly remember where I heard this. I think it's the Craig Rochelle Leadership Podcast. So all credit due to whoever told us this or whoever gave us this idea. But we use this with some of our clients is an energy audit. So you make a list of things that you have to do on a daily basis that are plus side column and minus side column. And then to differentiate between what's really a positive and what's really a negative, we call them plus ones and plus twos, minus ones, minus twos. And so for me, for example, as a teacher, like grading, I can't handle grading. Grading is a minus 2.5 probably for me. It's the one thing I really, really struggle with as a teacher. Even though I know feedback is incredibly important and I want like to give feedback, I would rather give feedback in a one-on-one conversation. I would rather give feedback as comments on a work. I don't think that a grade, an A B, a C, a D, provides much value in terms of feedback any longer. It may have at one point in time. Now I'm just down in the weeds on this conversation, but grading is a -2 for me. +2 for me is getting to have a personal conversation with a student. When I am able to talk to them about where they work or what they did this weekend, or how practice went last night in a sport that I wasn't involved in, like, and then to see them kind of light up and to be engaged in the conversation and to be personal, that's awesome. In my home life, like a -1 or a -2 is folding clothes. I don't like to fold clothes, right? A +2 for me, and this is different than when you and I live together, John. A +2 for me is like making sure that everything is picked up and kind of organized, tidy. Like when it's done, I'm very, very happy, right? And so that I probably learned from you. But you just go through some behaviors in your life. Playing guitar is a +2, right? How can I not prioritize things that are +2? Like that seems crazy to me, but I still don't do it every day. And so go through some things in your life that are really positive encouragement for your energy, and then some that are potentially a little bit positive that are like, okay, that's a good thing. And then -1, -2 in the same regard. And, if you're in a relationship, like maybe you can ask your spouse or your, significant other to carry some of those -2s for you, because they might not be -2s for them. My wife kind of likes folding clothes. So.
Well, and I was just going to say, just because it's on your minus side doesn't mean you don't have to do it, right? Like for you as a teacher, just because a -2 is grading doesn't mean you can't not grade. You still have to figure out a way to do it. But once you have the awareness of what fills your bucket, what drains you, now you can start to put a plan into place. How do you prioritize? How do you organize your day? I think it was the Craig Rochelle, because he talked about, how do I schedule meetings around, the beginning of my week or the beginning of my day or the end of my day? Like, do I know that I work really well at lunchtime? Great. Let's do the hardest things, the things that are going to take the most emotional energy, and put them there, because that's when I'm at my best. Now, the things that are a little bit more mindless, now I find time to do those things at a different time and I schedule it. And so as you become aware of those things, you can prioritize, you can make a plan and build around those things. But it doesn't mean you don't get to fold clothes. I mean, you still might have to fold the clothes, Jamie, but
For sure, I do. Not all the time. My wife's great.
yeah.
But that's a great reminder. We do this with teams, and I forget that the reason we talk about this is so that you can make a plan, so that you can get intentional, right? Don't just identify, use that information for your benefit.
Right. Well, and that's this to come most of the full circle here. We started this conversation with like, where did the last 10 days go?
Yeah.
And it's part of what happens when you are feeling like life is a blur is that you aren't intentional about how you are spending your time, what you are prioritizing. And yes, sometimes things come up and you have to react. That's part of life. But how do we get back to, hey, here's what drains me, here's what gives me energy. How do I make a realistic expectation of those activities for where I'm at right now? Give myself some grace. And sometimes you need other people in your life to say, hey, it's okay, but let's go. Like, it's okay, but now what? Right. And that's why we have these conversations, you and I. That's why we share with our listeners. And that's what because we're challenged to do the same thing. And we know that our lives, although they're special, they're just not that different from what you're dealing with.
No question. I think, if I have to pull a takeaway from this, it's get specific and intentional, right? Invest somebody in the process with you, share it, give that information away, like have one of these conversations with somebody else so that you can hear from somebody, hey, it's okay, but now what? What are you going to do? And I'm grateful for you that we get to have these conversations. I'm grateful that we get to have these conversations in a way that might benefit someone else. And, if you guys have questions or struggling with the same thing, by all means, come check us out, check out our Facebook group and begin this discussion in there. Cause I guarantee you other people are struggling through the same thing.
We look forward to, we got another great guest coming up next week. I'm excited. So we'll get back to interviews, but sometimes life just hits you and you got to talk about it. You got to readjust and move forward. So we're going to keep going. You guys out there do the same. And as always, we vise up.